Thanks for checking out the weekly sermon from Church of the Resurrection. I pray that God will use this message to speak to you and help you grow in your faith journey. If you're in the KC area, I'd like to invite you to join us next week at one of our services, or join us in live worship online at core.org/worship. Church of the Resurrection is one church in multiple locations. To learn more about the service times in our ministries, please visit core.org. Hope you enjoy this week's message.
My name is Steve Langhofer. I'm one of the pastors here at Resurrection. As we continue our worship, I invite us to hear these words from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of the people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. May God bless this reading to our understanding and to our daily living.
Recently, my sister-in-law shared with me a note that her daughter, Elena, 8.5 years old, wrote to Santa. And it appears that she had written a list of the things she hoped for from Santa for Christmas. And she sent that without actually providing any other narrative, without saying, hey, thank you, Santa, or here I am, or here's my story. And she began to feel kind of bad about that. Like, I should have written a note to Santa, not just a list of things I wanted. And so she composed a note for Santa, and here it is. And by the way, this is a picture of Elena you see here, holding her note. So, dear Santa, I'm sorry that I didn't write you a note. I'm so sorry. I think I maybe have been a good girl this year, but if you disagree, that's okay. Evan and me get in some arguments. I always try to be good. I just forgot to write you a note. Love, Elena. Most of us can relate to this, can't we? I mean, we get so busy and caught up in the season, and it's not about us giving our wish list to Santa, but it's about us trying to check off the list and make sure we bought everything for everybody, and the gifts that we're going to buy, not what Santa gives, but what we're going to give, and then getting everything wrapped, and then the meals, and trying to figure it all out in a COVID season especially. And so we get to Christmas Eve, and we feel tired and worn out, and maybe a bit like we've sort of forgotten what it's all about, and we're looking to find the real meaning of Christmas. That's why we gather here, isn't it? We gather to remember, what is the real meaning of Christmas? I spoke to someone recently who said to me, I feel like I need Christmas Eve candlelight service more this year than I ever have in my entire life. The world has felt so dark. Politics, conspiracy theories, injustice, a pandemic that's claimed the lives of more than 300,000 people, now 325,000 people. He said, it's dark, and I find myself longing for light. Are you longing for light? I am. And that's an interesting metaphor, this darkness and light. I mean, it's found throughout the Bible, but it's found actually in every form of literature and almost every religion. Darkness and light, we feel that in our lives. And when we think about darkness, I think about some of the scriptures like Proverbs that says, the way of the wicked is deep darkness. Or Job, you remember the righteous sufferer and the epic poem in which he describes his pain and trying to find out why God isn't stepping in and healing him and solving the problems. And he says, my face is red with weeping, darkness is on my eyelids. You ever felt that way? Or 1 John says, whoever hates a fellow believer is in darkness. So darkness is a metaphor for hate. It's a metaphor for suffering, for pain, for the things we do to each other and the things other people do to us. So as we think about that, light then on the other side is what dispels the darkness. So darkness is the absence of light. Light, I think it's Psalm 18, when I sit in darkness, the Lord will be light to me. Or the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear, the psalmist says. And so we see that contrast between darkness and light. So as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, that this is precisely what we read in Zechariah. Zechariah is the father of John the Baptist, and he offers this beautiful poem at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke. And he says this, describing what his son John would be preparing for as the Messiah would come. He says, by the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us. Listen, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. And then John, when he begins his gospel, he starts with the Christmas story, but he doesn't have the wise men or the shepherd or the angels. What he begins with is a sort of cosmic picture of Christmas. And I want you to listen to one portion of this. He says, what has come into being in Jesus was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. That's the theme. That's really what Christmas is from John's perspective. It's light and darkness, and the light comes, pushes back the darkness couldn't overcome it. And that's what we celebrate every year at Candlelight Christmas Eve. We get to the climax of the service and we pass the candlelight. You remember, we darkened the room, and in a few minutes we're going to ask you to darken your own room. And hopefully, if you have access to a candle, you'd have a large candle that would represent Jesus, and then you have smaller candles that represent you. If you don't have candles, that's fine. You'll watch us do it. But we darken the room and we remember how dark the world can be at times. And then we bring the Christ candle in. One family brings in a tiny little candle. The baby is born and we light the Christ candle. And you can see that in the video footage you see here on the screen that we've got the Christ candle is lit. And then once that Christ candle is lit, we take that light. We remember that Christ is born. We take the light and we begin to share it with each other. So we say the light of Christ. And then you take that light like you're accepting Christ yourself, and then you pass on it to someone else. And then pretty soon the entire room is filled with light. And we ask people to raise their candles up. And you look to see the whole room is filled with light. And as we do that, we recognize that Christmas is God's strategic plan to change the world. It is God's plan to address the darkness, the pain, the brokenness in our world, sending Jesus to be the light, to be God's light for the world, and then calling his disciples. He passes on that light. And here's the twofold movement of this sermon and of really Christmas, is Jesus says when he grows up, he says as a man, I am the light of the world. And then he turns to his disciples and he says, now you are the light of the world. I am the light of the world. Now you are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others that they might see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven. God's strategic plan for changing the world isn't just about Jesus. It includes you and me. We are called to take his light, to reflect his light, and then to share his light with others. So in the next few minutes, I want to give you a few examples. I mean, we could go on for hours talking about examples of what this looks like. So I'm just going to give you 3 or 4 examples of what it looks like to accept Christ's light, how he changes us, how Jesus changed things, and then how we're called to reflect that light to other people. So I want to begin. As I was working on this sermon, I had an old country and western song in mind. I'm not a big country and western fan, but this is one of those songs. It's actually an old gospel song. It was written in 1947 by Hank Williams Sr. Some consider him the greatest country and western songwriter and singer of all time. He died when he was 29 years old in 1953, but not before he wrote this gospel song. And in what you're about to see, it's called I Saw the Light, and I'm guessing you probably remember at least the refrain of the song, but he's performing it at the Grand Ole Opry, and you'll see Hank Williams Sr. is standing there in a white suit, just right of center, with musical notes on his suit, and I want you to catch just the power and the passion and the joy of this refrain, I Saw the Light. Take a listen.
I was a fool to wonder and stray, for straight is the gate and narrow's the way. But now I have traded the wrong for the right. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. I saw the light, I saw the light. No more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow inside. Praise the Lord, I saw the light.
Do you feel the passion in that and the joy? I saw the light. You see, you sing that with vitality, with passion when you've been in the darkness, right? When you've been in the darkness and you're afraid or scared or you feel broken or your life's a mess, and then you see Christ's redemptive power, his love, his grace, his mercy. You see that God is the God of the second chance. Suddenly, you begin to feel the light. You don't just see it, you feel it. Hank Williams' biographer, one of his biographers, said this song is the prayer of the backslider who lives in hope of redemption. That's really all of us. So again, Hank Williams Sr. struggled with the darkness. He struggled with alcoholism, addictions to drugs, and painkillers, and died in the backseat of a car as he was being driven to his next concert at the age of 29 from alcohol. In 2016, there was a film that was made about his life. I think there have been several, but 2016, and this film was also called I Saw the Light. And in the trailer, you have a chance to hear just a little bit of his struggle with the darkness and yet pointing towards the light. Take a listen.
Boy, I'm a professional at making a mess of things. Everybody has a little darkness in them. Now I'm talking about things like anger, sorrow, shame. I show it to them. And they hear it, and they don't have to take it home. Now I'm so happy of sorrow. Country music, it's sincere. Man sings a sad song, he knows it's sad.
I wonder if you've ever felt like a professional at making a mess of things. Or if there are times where you've felt that little bit of darkness inside that all of us wrestle with. You see, part of the light of Christ is offering us redemption. It's offering us forgiveness. It's saying that you have value and worth to God and that you can be made clean and new. I want to recognize that Jesus said the reason why he came was to seek and to save those who were lost. Think about his parable of the 100 sheep, and one of them wandered away. And didn't the shepherd leave the 99 behind to go find that one lost sheep? And if you've ever felt like you were lost, then you've got a sense of what Jesus came to do and what Christmas is all about. Jesus spent most of his time ministering with the people that the religious folks called sinners and tax collectors. People who drank too much, people who lied and gossiped, adulterers, prostitutes, and a whole host of other folks. And Jesus called them his friends. And he showed them that they were loved and wanted by God. I keep a reminder of this redeeming work of God on my desk in my study. And you can see this picture here. This is a cross a woman named Janelle made for me. She's an inmate in a Tennessee prison. She's serving a 10-year sentence. And in prison, she learned she was an artist. She also is a faithful part of the only United Methodist Church I know of that exists only behind prison bars. And this Grace Place is the name of the church, great name for a church, Grace Place United Methodist Church. And they have a pastor who goes in, she visits them, visits their people, and helps them to grow in their faith. And Janelle's a part of that congregation. She's made 5 of these crosses, and I received one of them. Robin Roberts on Good Morning America received another one, and there were several other pastors who received these. They're very important to her, and it's become for me a sign of what Jesus does for us. You see, here's how she made these, is she went in the mess hall and she dug through the trash. And what she found was the boxes that the jelly came in, and she took those boxes and she began to work with them to create the base. And then there were cartons that the biscuits came in. She found them in the trash in the kitchen, and she pulled those out. And she began to make strips and to create the cross itself. And for her, this is a picture of what Jesus has done for her. She said, I felt like refuse. I felt like trash to other people and to me, that I had no hope. And then Jesus saw me, and he brought light to me. On the bottom, she wrote, he is the rock of my salvation. And she saw the light. And now she says, I make these crosses and other works of art as a way of reflecting his light, of telling the story of how he's changed my life, how he took someone that was garbage, at least in my eyes, in the eyes of some, and he redeemed me, and he's making me into something beautiful. I love this cross. It represents the way Christ brings light into our world. I wonder, have you ever felt worthless? Like you were refuse, you were garbage, maybe nobody cared, or you had blown it? And part of what Jesus says is that God is the God of the second chance. He came, he spent most of his time with sinners. That's just how they referred to them in the gospel, sinners and tax collectors. And he said, God wants you. And he says that to you too. If you've made a mess of things, he says, I want you. He is the light. And then we're called to take that light, and then we're called to reflect that light to other people. Let's shift gears and look at another illustration of how Jesus brings light. In the Greco-Roman world of the time in which Jesus lived, people with disabilities were scorned and rejected. Sometimes babies were left to die in the Greco-Roman world. As they grew up, there were horrible names that were sometimes used to describe people with disabilities, and were always seen as second class. Now, in Judaism, there was greater compassion, but it was believed by many first century Jews that if you had a disability, it was because either you sinned, however you might have sinned if you were born with this, maybe in the womb, or your parents sinned. And so this was a curse as a result of sin. That's how people with disabilities were seen, an expression of the displeasure of God, still treated with compassion. But it's interesting to read the Gospels and to see how Jesus, the light of the world, responds to people whose bodies were broken or were born with disabilities or otherly abled. And so what you find is Jesus is constantly ministering with people who were paralytics, people whose bodies were withered in some way. That was the word that was used in the New Testament. People who were blind or deaf or people who couldn't speak. Jesus is constantly ministering with them. Matthew tells us in Matthew 21:14, he says, the blind and the lame sought him out at the temple. In the synagogues too, they would come and they would try to find him. And he was constantly spending time with them, caring for them, blessing them, treating them as human beings, seeing them as loved children of God. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus tells his disciples that if they really want to please God, they will welcome into their homes the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind to eat at their tables. I want you to catch this. For people who had been made to feel like they were cursed or second class, Jesus was light. He said, you are treasured by God. You matter to God. You are beautiful in his sight. I remember when there was a man who was born blind and Jesus came along and his disciple says, who sinned, Jesus? His parents or this man? And Jesus said, neither of them sinned. But his blindness is an occasion for the work of God to be seen. And not just in the healing that Jesus did, but really his entire life was an opportunity, just like yours, for the work of God to be seen. So in the Roman Empire, when Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, you finally begin to see a shift in how people with special needs were treated. Very different from what it was prior to that time, because people had seen Christ. Not everybody, but those who really saw Christ understood. So here at Church of the Resurrection, we started a ministry 27 years ago. We had one family who visited with a boy with special needs. And when he visited, the family said, well, your church is so small. We were meeting in a school gym. There's no way we could expect you to be able to, meet our needs. We need one-on-one care during Sunday school and during worship. And we said, look, we'll do, we're the kind of church, we'll do whatever it takes. If you just tell us what he needs, we'll have it started in 2 weeks. And 2 weeks later, we had a ministry started. We named it after him, Matthew's Ministry. And today there are hundreds of children, youth, and adults who are part of that. I wanted you to hear just a little bit from them. This was a video we put together a couple of years ago for their 25th anniversary as a ministry. Take a listen.
In 1993, the Church of the Resurrection made a commitment to serve the special needs community by starting with one child, Matthew Joyner. 25 years later, Matthew's ministry has touched the lives of thousands. The participants worship and learn while serving their own church community. Listen as they speak from their hearts in their own words.
My dad and I started this scout troop for adults with special needs.
Wednesdays I do the bakery, and that's how I started to come.
Make cookies for the people. They get hungry too,
We're quite busy here.
Yeah, totally.
I pray for my friends and for my dad.
Do you think Matthew's ministry is important? Can you tell us why?
Because we get to help people.
Oh man, I love Sarah's comments. You see, we started Matthew's ministry thinking we were going to help persons with special needs. Sarah says we're in Matthew's ministry because we want to help the rest of you. See, they have found in Matthew's ministry, we matter to God. We are beautiful in his sight. We matter to God. And as we walk in his light, what we want to do, we're really grateful for all the volunteers who help, hundreds of volunteers who help. They're so grateful. But you know what they see themselves doing here at Church of the Resurrection? They see themselves ministering to you and to me. Right? Jesus is the light, and then we walk in the light. We receive his light. We walk in that light, and then we share that light with other people. Do you see it and how it works? How this is God's strategic plan for changing the world? Jennifer Ross has directed this ministry for the last 17 years. She's retiring this week. Jennifer's done an amazing job. And here's her picture. I asked Jennifer, I was presenting her with a plaque to recognize her, a part of the stained glass window with the only resurrection member in our stained glass window, that is Matthew, as a way of saying to every special needs family, every special needs person, you matter in this church. We value you. So Jennifer, I asked her to tell me her feelings about the participants in Matthew's ministry and what she's gotten out of it these last 17 years. Here's what she said. Their love and joy make my heart so happy. They energize me. Their love of God and people could teach us all how to be more Christ-like. They are not selfish. They give selflessly with such great joy. They just want to be loved and included. They make me smile, and I look forward to showing up every day. I am a better person and have grown so much in my faith because of their model of Christianity. I'm the light of the world. Now you go be the light of the world. All right, suffering, adversity, sickness. This has been a hard year for so many people. Tuesday of this week, I had another funeral for a long time. I've been founding one of the first 10 members of our congregation, Max Isaacson, and he died last week. It was, I think, last Friday, if I remember correctly, maybe Thursday at Research Medical Center. And he died of COVID. And Darlene couldn't go in to see him. Only one person could go in, and so Max's son went in to be with him. And so I went down to Research Hospital, and I found Darlene in the parking lot. There was a lawn chair there, and her daughter and her granddaughter were there. And you know, she wanted to be as close as possible to where Max was as he was dying. She wanted to keep vigil for him there. And they had an iPad or something in the ICU where Max was, and she spoke to her husband and saw, you know, he looked like he was in discomfort, and asked her son, Andy, go get a cold washcloth, Andy, and wipe his face. And Andy sang to his dad and prayed with his dad and talked about their stories together. And in the midst of doing all of that, Max finally passed. But it's been a hard year. A hard year. Some in anger and disappointment have asked, well, where is God in the middle of all this? Like, why did God send COVID? Or if I don't believe God sent COVID, why didn't God stop it? And that's understandable, like that we would ask these kind of questions. But I'm going to suggest to you, and we're going to talk more about this next month in our series on A Thinking Person's Guide to Faith, but I'm going to suggest to you that there might be two different ways of thinking about God and the world around us. One is that God is the micromanager of the entire cosmos, 93 billion light years across, and God is micromanaging every part of it, every cell, the 30 trillion cells in your body, and he's micromanaging every cell at all times. He's micromanaging every one of the 7 billion human beings on this planet. He's constantly watching every single thing and stopping car accidents and making car accidents happen, and he's inserting cancer cells, or he doesn't stop cancer cells from forming. You know, that's kind of one view of God. And so when we think of God in that way as the micromanager, then of course we're going to ask, well, why did God send COVID? Or why didn't he stop COVID? Because he could have, and why didn't he? Right? Or car accidents, or cancer, or unemployment, or 1,000 other things. So could God do that? Micromanage every single thing? I suppose God could. God could do anything. Is that really how God created the universe? Like, is that really what God wants to do? Or did he create this beautiful world that we live in? Right? And it's got all kinds of potential and all kinds of wonderful things. And at the same time, there's also the possibility of being harmed in it. Right? I think of earthquakes, right? And the tectonic plates that move. And that's a part of the convection system that cools the interior of our planet. Like, it's amazing. But when those tectonic plates, you know, finally clash long enough, they release energy, which becomes an earthquake. They also create mountains. And if you build a house in the fault zone, and you build it and you don't have much money, you build a house that's not built to withstand earthquakes, you're going to die probably. Right? So is it God causing the earthquakes, or is that part of the processes that God designed into our planet that are really amazing, but we have to be careful for them? I mean, when my kids grew up, you know, when they got their first car, I mean, I remember standing there in the driveway as they drove off for the first time, and I was scared to death. Like, I had tried to teach them all the right things, but now I was releasing them, and I realized they could die in a car accident or something else. That was beyond my control. And so I had to just trust that I'd taught them well. Like, it seems like maybe that's how God works in the world, is more like creating all of these wonderful things, bodies that are fearfully and wonderfully made that repair themselves. I scratch my car, it doesn't repair itself. I scratch my arm, it repairs itself. Like, it's amazing. And at the same time, you know, sometimes those cells go haywire. Viruses, pathogens develop, right? They're constantly evolving and changing, mutating. And so we think about those. Well, why are there pathogens anyway? I was reading an article in Discovery magazine this week, and it was interesting. It noted that pathogens or viruses really play an important role in human history in the development of the variety of animal forms on this planet. And it said, I didn't realize this, it said there are 100,000 known fragments of virus in the human genome, making up 8% of our DNA. Like somehow those viruses play some kind of important role in creating, and developing how God, developed us. And at the same time, sometimes they come along and they evolve in a way that's harmful to us, right? And then we have to fight really hard to figure out the answers, which we've done in the last year. We're, getting ready to unleash the vaccines, and how amazing is that? But God's not micromanaging. It's like, hey, this is the planet. This is the world that we live in, and there's risks in living, and there's beauty, and there's far more beauty than risks. And here's what God said: I'm not going to come in and micromanage everything. I'm going to walk with you no matter what happens. And Jesus came to be the light, to be Emmanuel, God with us, to say, I'm with you no matter what. Don't be afraid. I've got you. Over and over again in the Bible, don't be afraid. I'm with you. God is with us. And then Jesus shows us what God is like. And then he shows us how we're supposed to walk and live. And then he suffers and dies so that we might have forgiveness and redemption, and that God himself suffers for us. And then he's raised from the dead to demonstrate clearly that cancer and COVID and pain and brokenness and death never get the final word. That's how Christ is the light. I love this. This is the gospel. I am the light of the world, he said. And then he said, now you go live as the light of the world to show other people, to put flesh on my light. That's what we're called to do. So many of you have been doing this. I think of every one of you who's watching right now who are healthcare workers, right? All of you doctors and nurses and EMTs and police and firefighters who've been on the front line risking your lives to help people. How exhausted and worn out you have felt throughout this year, how afraid sometimes. And yet God used you as light. He hopefully was your light, but then in turn you turned around to be the light for other people. How many times I've heard people who talked about a nurse or a doctor who was there with their loved one when they died, when they couldn't be in the ICU. You were the light. Every patient you called upon, every person you visited, every person you picked up and took to the hospital. Jesus says, I'm the light, but now you be the light. And you did this. For many of us, it's in simpler acts than that. It's showing up with food when somebody's sick, a neighbor is sick, somebody's in the hospital, and back in the day when we could go visit, but now we make phone calls to them. It's all the myriad of ways that we go about showing love and light to people who are feeling discouraged and down. I got to tell you about somebody in our congregation who passed away recently. We celebrated her life, Marty Mather. Marty was also one of our founding members in the church. Well, she was here after, I think, the second year. And she'd done so many amazing things. She was 93 when she died. She'd done so many amazing things to change the world. But here was the thing she was kind of most, proud of, I think. I don't know, proud. Maybe it's the thing she loved the most. She loved to bake bread. And she made the best egg bread. And then cinnamon rolls, these awesome cinnamon rolls. And then she saw it as her ministry to give bread away. Now, I want you to catch this. It wasn't that she thought people didn't have enough food to eat. It's that something about a piece of homemade, a loaf of homemade bread might lift the heart of people who are discouraged. She would come to church on Sundays here in our sanctuary. She'd come to church on Sundays, and she would bring 6 to 8 loaves of bread every weekend. I mean, you got to imagine this woman's not very big, and she's carrying these, 2-pound loaves of bread, 6 of them, sometimes 8 of them, and she's just looking around to see who looks like they need bread today. Every Sunday, I was reading a note she sent me about 10 years ago describing, the people she had seen just the week before giving bread to, walking out in the parking lot looking for people, seeing people who were standing there lighting candles as they came in and wondering which one looked like they had tears or needed a loaf of bread. The person who's sitting by themselves. Here's what I want to ask you. By the way, here's a picture of Marty Mather, the bread lady. She'd make 500 or 600 loaves of bread a year and give away almost all of them. But here's what I want to ask you. What's your loaf of bread? Like, what is it that you can give to encourage other people, to bless them, to care for them, to help them? What is yours to give? Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And then he said, you are the light of the world. All right, that leads me to close with the story of Hudson Sands. Hudson was 6 years old, and we celebrated his life on Tuesday. He passed away this last Friday. A year ago, October 31st, he was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. Only 150 to 300 kids a year receive this diagnosis, a brain tumor that is untreatable. Nobody makes it out of this. So, of course, we pray. But here's one of the first things. When I went to the family's home in November of last year, I said, I just want to tell you this. God didn't give your son a brain tumor. He's not trying to teach you something. He's not punishing you for something you did. This is just part of what happens sometimes. 3 billion kids in the world, and 150 to 300 receive this every year, and most of them don't make it past a year. Some do. Some make it longer than that. And I want you to know this. God didn't cause this, and we're going to pray for a miracle, but miracles don't often happen because God works through people in ordinary ways, and what God promised wasn't that he was always going to provide the miracle to make sure nothing bad ever happened. Nobody dies in car accidents or wars or famines or from coronavirus. Sometimes we see those miracles. We're going to pray really hard for that. But here's the thing. I know what God has said. He said, I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to walk with Hudson. And I love him more than you could imagine or believe. And I'm going to carry you through this. And no matter what happens, I'm going to redeem the suffering and bring something good from it. And Hudson belongs to me. And when this life is over, whether it's at the age of 6 or 96, I'm going to be there waiting for him to take him into my home. But here's the thing. It wasn't just what God did through Jesus for Hudson and for his mom and dad to give them strength and to help them find light in the middle of this really dark place with darkness on their eyelids and their faces red with tears. It was the fact that God called other people to be the light of the world too. So it was Jesus, but then it was people who put flesh on that. And so all of these people began surrounding this family with love and care. Like they had a parade for him. Earlier this year, I shared it in a sermon where they'd organized this, the Dream Factory had helped organize it, and other folks. He was going to go to Disney World. COVID shut down Disney World, so all of a sudden these Disney characters come walking down the street, and people in their cars and tractors and monster trucks, and all of these people coming down for like 2 hours. They came by just to say to this kid sitting in the lawn chair out front who's dying, hey, we care. Right? He got to the end, like 2 hours of this, and he turned to his mommy, and he looked exhausted, and his mom thought he was going to say, Mommy, I'm really tired. Can I go inside? He says, Mommy, I hope this never ends. Can I have another parade when this one's done? Like, you go to his house, and so there I was sitting in the living room, and they moved his bed to the living room, and I just want you to see the signs on the walls. Take a look at this picture. Like, this is where Hudson spent his last few weeks. And all these signs from people who were Team Hudson. Let me tell you some of the stories. So he played soccer. Like this summer, he got to play soccer. He got to finish the entire season. He was so proud he got to finish the season. He couldn't run anymore. So you know what the kids did? The coaches agreed beforehand, and they told the story. And they agreed that the kids at one point would bring Hudson out on the playing field. And he couldn't run, but he could walk up to the goal, and he'd kick a goal, and he got a goal at every single game. And the kids are just lined up watching. Like those kids on the field, they were being the light for Hudson. He got to go to kindergarten. He was afraid to go to kindergarten because he was in a wheelchair and he wasn't sure, how are the kids going to treat me? And I can't do the same things they do. He was kind of afraid. He went to school that first day and he came home and he told his mom, he said, Mom, they were fighting over who got to push me in the wheelchair today. You see the kids in the kindergarten class and his teacher. Like they were the light for this kid. Right? I mean, it was just like that. A couple weeks ago, there were people out in front, playing Christmas songs, and ringing bells, and shining lights, and all these people were reflecting the light of Christ to help this child and his family be able to make it through the valley of the shadow of death without being afraid. By the way, his mom and dad, they were talking to him a couple of months ago, and he said, Mommy, Daddy, you know my favorite holiday? What is it, son? They were expecting Halloween, with candy, or Christmas with all the presents. And he said, Easter's my favorite holiday because Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus came to be the light in the middle of our darkness. And we trust in him, and we walk in his light, and we experience it, we feel it. And then he calls us to reflect his light, to give his light, to share his light with others. And when we do that, we find the world has changed. Darkness is pushed back, and there is light in life. Hey, one of the songs that we sang at his funeral, we're going to sing right now. It's a song that he'd heard many times as a kid. I'd like to invite you to sing it with me. Just put up your finger like this. And would you sing this with me? This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let's pray. Lord, how grateful we are that you came to us in Jesus to show us your light, your love, your redeeming power, your grace, the hope that we have in you, to show us that we matter to you, that there is always hope. And we hear your call upon our lives today to be the light of the world. You are the light of the world. You've called us to be the light for the world. Help us to do that. Help us to embrace and accept your light, walk in your light, and then share your light, reflect your light, and push back the darkness. We offer our lives to you in your holy name. Amen. And now, before we move to the candle lighting, we always have our Candlelight Christmas Eve offering. And I want to remind you, 100% of what you give in the offering today is going to be given to benefit projects for children and families living in poverty. Half of it stays here in Kansas City, half of it goes internationally. Our main focus this year, there's 13 projects we're funding. The main focus this year is on early childhood education. So I want to take you first to Della C. Lamb. They're an organization, a Methodist organization here in Kansas City, and you are helping expand their preschool offering to children who wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to have a pre-K education. So let's take a listen to one of the teachers and the director of Della Lamb's early childhood education. Take a listen.
A missing piece for a lot of these kids is resources, and when they come into our classroom, we provide those resources for them. And some of our kiddos are already starting to read, and that just wouldn't happen if they weren't in our room. The biggest part I see with the children's growth is really just becoming their own self. We had some kiddos start the year not talking at all to just talking our ears off, and it just gives us this big smile.
We think of ourselves not as a nonprofit that serves for, but serves with the Church of the Resurrection. Amidst the pandemic and the scarcity and their incredible generosity, gave us a grant in order to welcome new families to Della Lamb. Yes, we get to see in these moments as we see children begin to say their ABCs or tie their shoe or learn to skip. But the foundation that is established allows for future growth. So the impact of the gift will be in this moment with new classrooms, but imagine the number of children and families who will be served in those classrooms for years to come.
I love that, and that's just one of several projects here in Kansas City that you're going to make possible for kids right here who need your help, who need us to be the light, to put flesh on God's love for them. Now I want to take you to Malawi in South Africa, or in Southern Africa. It's South Central Africa, a tiny sliver of a country, and these are 22 preschools that you're going to be sponsoring there. Let's take a look. So many of you have been with us to Malawi. I've been there 2 times myself. It's a beautiful country with beautiful people, and people who are among the most impoverished in the world. There are 22 rural villages where you're going to provide preschools, 22. And these are some of the kids you're going to be providing for who are there. I'm so excited about this. And these kids' futures are going to be different because of you. In addition to what we're doing in Malawi, there's a preschool and an elementary school in South Africa. It's built around a trash dump. This is it. The Sheho is the name of this community, and the school is an amazing place that gives hope to kids. These kids, I've been there twice also. These kids live in shacks. They, again, their families, many of them work the trash dump. They are living in conditions you wouldn't believe, and you have a chance to provide preschool and education for these kids to give them a way out of poverty and a future with hope. You can do that today. And so here's what we do. At Christmas Eve, again, we give away the entire offering. You have a chance to give in this way. You can use your phone to give. I'll tell you how in just a moment. But among our Resurrection members, there are hundreds of them who already decided in advance, I'm going to give in this offering to benefit these kids what I spent on my own family for Christmas. Levon and I do this every year. We do at least what we spend on our family, usually more than that. And so we calculate, here's what we spent, here's what we're going to do in this Christmas Eve offering, because our kids don't need anything, but these kids need everything. And so you may not be able to do that, but there's many who do that or more. Many of our people just say, okay, this is what I spent on an average gift, and I'm going to do that for every member of my family. I'm going to do that in this offering. And you have a chance to have a huge impact by means of doing that. Some people can't afford to do that. So whatever you can afford to do, I'd like to encourage you to do. The wise men brought their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We have a chance to make our offerings today and to benefit children and to be light for them. Here's how you give. So you take out your phone and you text COR to the number 77977. COR to 77977. You hit send, and it's going to send you a link. You click on the link, and then there you'll choose the Candlelight Christmas Eve offering and whatever amount you choose to give. Whatever it is, no amount's too small or too large. We're going to be grateful, and really it's not us being grateful. It's kids who are going to find hope because of what you do. So I'm excited about this. Levon and I are excited to give, and I'm excited for you to give. Let's give to God generously. Let's give to these kids generously, and let's be the light for someone else.
Thank you for watching this week's sermon. We'd love for you to join us again online or live in worship. To learn more about Church of the Resurrection, please visit core.org. Have a great week.